Welcome back to Canyon Tune, and today we are going to continue building the 6.0 and preparing it to go back in the Corvette. So we got a whole bunch of parts from Texas Speed. I will go over those individually, and today's goal is really just to put the cam in, put the end covers back on, oil pump, try to get the windage tray back on. I got to modify the windage tray a little bit for the ARP hardware, and then put the oil pan back on, basically just reseal the motor. So there's a lot of different ways to do this on LS's. I see it done the wrong way quite frequently, so I want to add some tips to this video to make sure your engine's actually sealed and going to stay sealed for a long time. The first step in assembly is actually going to be the cam. I'm just going to show you real quick what cam I had spec'd out. This is they call this the 228R from Texas Speed. It's a 228 intake and exhaust. I got the 112 duration, and it's a 600 lift. I probably could have gone a 625 lift, but yeah, this should be pretty good. But there's the cam specs there for you guys. Like I said, I'm going to be using this car for road racing, so I did need that low end power still, so I didn't want to go too crazy or aggressive with it. And you guys are probably seen this done 1,000 times, but you want to take your long water pump bolts so you got something to hang on to when you're sliding that into the motor. And just a tip here, make sure you guys are replacing this cam retainer plate, because there's a little built-in gasket, and those like to flatten out fairly easily. And then what ends up happening is you lose oil pressure internally across this little crossover pipe for the oil passages. So it's good insurance to get a new one of these. Okay, next step is I'm actually going to rotate the motor over upside down and start working on the bottom end. I need to modify the windage tray, and then we're going to throw hopefully the oil pump on. Alright, so since I have ARP main studs, there's a little bit of an issue with the stock windage tray. Putting this back on. Some of the bolt holes have to be enlarged, and then I believe you have to space it out a little bit with some washers to make sure that it clears the crank. I believe the issue is these nuts, when you put them on, they're a lot shorter than stock ones, so it makes this windage tray sit a lot lower, and it'll end up hitting the crank. And then I believe for like stroker motors, you actually want to get a different windage tray, or you could just bash the hell out of it and get clearance that way too. Alright, we made the holes a little bit bigger, so hopefully we can set this down now. Yep. Okay, and then let me just look through here and see if it hits. Actually, it's not looking too bad, although there is a little bit of a area where it hits. Of course, I ran out of 10 mils washers, so I ended up actually getting these like slim jam nuts, and I think that actually might work a little bit better to space this out to get the windage tray up a little bit higher. They actually sell these pieces that kind of like fit in between and look all fancy, but a lot of people just stack washers, but I think this will work better than that. I hope this isn't too tall, but we're gonna see. I think I was actually right on the money with that. I'm actually going to turn the motor over and just keep an eye on things and make sure nothing hits. Alright, we're jumping around here a little bit, but this is a brand new LS2 timing chain. I heard these LS2 ones are a pretty decent upgrade for Gen 3 motors, so we're going to be throwing that in. And I'm going to be setting the timing now. So timing an LS motor is pretty straightforward. All you're going to do is, there's 2 alignment dots and they just have to face each other. So we first get the crank one. My motor's upside down right now, but you get the crank one facing up and the cam one facing down. As long as they're in alignment, you should be good to go. And then do like a little full rotation of the entire engine just to make sure you're not 1 tooth off or something. But if you're 1 tooth off on these, it's fairly apparent. Okay, and then there's the 3 bolt holes and then 1 little dowel pin where the actual cam goes in. So you're actually going to want to rotate this and make sure everything's lined up before. So I got my 2 dots that are lined up, and I'm just going to take my chain, put it on there. Okay, so I have this Melling high pressure pump, and what's interesting is they don't have any kind of sealant between this surface of the face of this thing and where it goes into the block. And I was a little bit sketched out by that, but apparently they're 2 finely machined surfaces and you don't have to worry about them leaking. But I don't know. It would be nice to have like a little bead of RTV around it. Who knows? I'm gonna just do what they say to do and not mess around. So it would go like this. Yep. Following the instructions, they say to leave the bolts finger tight on the oil pump and then rotate the engine 365 degrees. And then finally torque them down, because that way it actually centers the little gear that goes inside the oil pump itself, and you don't get any excessive wear on one side or the other. Now we're gonna install our oil pump pickup tube. Because I had to space out the windage tray a little bit, I'm a little bit worried that the oil pickup tube is going to be too low now for the oil pan. So we're going to test fit the oil pan. Because it comes in 2 halves, the batwing oil pan. We're going to put the top half on and then just sort of measure the clearance that we have left for the sump. You need a little bit because you don't want to be too close to the bottom, or else you won't get that, you know, oil volume going through the pickup tube there. But overall, just gonna probably put the front cover on next. Rear cover is gonna be interesting because I have to like kind of squeeze it in between this engine stand, but we should be able to get it on. Doesn't fit. Okay, the pan finally fits now, and it's flat, so let me show you guys what I ended up modifying. It's gonna be a little tough to see on camera, but let me bring you around. Okay, so I ended up doing a little hole right here because the inner bolts, because there's 2 main bolts on each main cap, the inner bolts hit on this little radius here. So I ended up just notching out that little area and everything set flat. Still running a 1 washer underneath just to kind of space it out a tiny bit to give me more clearance for the crank and everything. But yeah, everything fits now, and I'm gonna torque all these down and we should be good. That's pretty much gonna do it for today's episode. Don't wanna bore you with putting the engine covers back on because that's fairly standard. One tip I do have is get yourself one of these. This helps you center the timing cover in relation to the crank so you don't have any leaks. So this kind of locates your front main seal. There's a rear main seal tool as well, but I don't have that at the moment. And the gasket, or the O-ring actually came with a plastic piece kind of like this for the rear. Not too worried about that one. But yeah, basically you put the seal on the cover and then you slip it on with this, and then you kind of locate it, and then you can eventually torque it all down, and that way it's nice and level with your block, and it's actually centered with your crank, so you won't have any front cover leaks a couple miles down the road. That actually happened to me once when I did the cam on my C6, because I didn't even know this tool existed. So especially if you're doing like higher volume LS stuff, or you're taking motors apart, doing cam swaps a lot, this tool helps quite a bit. So I'm probably not going to do a full episode on swapping out the valve springs and putting the oil pan back on and stuff. So the next episode will actually probably be dropping the motor in the car. I do have to put this back on a engine hoist so I can put the clutch on, because obviously you can't do it with this. But yeah, it's very close to going in the car. Pretty excited. But I don't know if I said this in the last video, it's going to be easier for me to drop this in the car with a bare short block without the cylinder heads. It'll give me a lot more clearance and wiggle room to be able to drop that thing in, because it was such a pain to remove the engine. So I'm trying to make things easier on myself this time around. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of this build so far, and should make a lot of power once it's all done and be nice and reliable, so should be pretty fun. I mean, the car was super fun before it broke, so hoping to get it back up and running soon. And then just got to do some break-in miles, because it is a brand new engine and transmission basically, and then everything else is pretty much new too. So lots of breaking in, oil changes before I can really start beating on it, but we'll see how it does.